Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. There's something ancient beneath every city, buried not just in stone, but in memory. In the works of H.P. Lovecraft, lost cities are not quaint ruins to be studied and restored. They are warnings. They are remnants of civilizations that should not have existed, whose architecture encodes ideas the human mind was never meant to grasp. And yet we keep digging. This documentary investigates the lost cities of Lovecraft as more than fictional settings. They are philosophical structures, built from fear, time, and decay. We will trace their lineage from ancient myths of sunken empires to modern anxieties about forgotten knowledge. We'll examine how Lovecraft borrowed from colonial-era archaeology, reconfigured it through a lens of cosmic dread, and embedded it in a network of recurring names, impossible geometries, and mythic timelines. What makes these cities powerful is not their detail, but their absence. They exist in blank spots on maps, in dreams that feel like memories, in texts no one should have read. To speak of Rlyeh, Irem, or Kadath is to implicate yourself in something older than history and colder than time. This is not a travelogue. It is an excavation of ideas that resist being unearthed. By continuing, you are already inside the ruins. H.P. Lovecraft's fascination with lost cities emerges from a specific historical pressure point. Writing primarily between 1917 and 1937, Lovecraft lived during a period when Western confidence in linear progress was quietly eroding. Archaeology, once a hobby of antiquarians, had become a public spectacle. The rediscovery of Machu Picchu in 1911, the excavation of Troy in the late 19th century, and the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 reshaped how the public imagined the past. Ancient civilizations were no longer abstract ancestors. They were real, buried, and disturbingly sophisticated. Lovecraft absorbed this shift and redirected it toward unease rather than wonder. Lovecraft's personal circumstances sharpened this orientation. He experienced modernity as decline rather than advancement. Industrialization, immigration, and urban growth struck him as symptoms of cultural entropy. This anxiety does not remain political in his fiction. It becomes temporal. His lost cities do not merely precede humanity. They invalidate it. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft was not interested in forgotten human empires, but in civilizations that made humanity incidental. The ruins he imagined are not tragic remnants of greatness, but evidence that greatness never belonged to us in the first place. Scientific discourse provided a crucial framework. Early 20th century geology and evolutionary biology extended Earth's timeline beyond comforting scales. The planet was suddenly ancient in ways that resisted narrative containment. Lovecraft followed this logic to its extreme. If Earth is billions of years old, why should human civilization occupy a privileged position? Cities like those in At the Mountains of Madness function as speculative extrapolations of scientific humility. They embody a world where intelligence flourished, declined, and vanished long before humans learned to write. The horror lies not in destruction, but in replacement. Lovecraft's engagement with archaeology is instructive here. Real archaeology seeks reconstruction, fragments assembled into coherent histories. Lovecraft reverses this impulse. His ruins refuse interpretation. Their inscriptions induce madness. Their architecture defies Euclidean description. This is not ignorance, but intent. He understood that archaeology had begun to destabilize biblical and classical timelines. He simply pushed the destabilization further. Not history clarified, but history rendered hostile. The past, in Lovecraft's hands, does not explain the present. It threatens it. Literary. Context reinforces this reading. Lost cities appear throughout 19th century adventure fiction, from H. Rider Haggard's She to Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian Ruins. These cities promise discovery and mastery. Lovecraft adopts the form, but rejects the reward. His explorers do not conquer ruins. They survive them, often barely. The city becomes an anti-romantic object. It offers no treasure, only perspective, and that perspective diminishes the observer. This reveals something profound about Lovecraft's method. He weaponizes genre expectations to undermine narrative comfort. We must pause here to address intention. Lovecraft repeatedly described his aim as inducing cosmic fear. Lost cities serve this aim precisely because they are legible enough to suggest meaning, yet opaque enough to deny closure. They are designed as epistemic traps. The reader, like the fictional scholar, is compelled to infer histories that cannot be confirmed. What kind of civilization builds cities meant to outlast comprehension? The question lingers because it cannot be answered. By grounding his lost cities in contemporary science, archaeological spectacle, and cultural anxiety, Lovecraft made them feel disturbingly plausible. They are not fantasy locations, but conceptual instruments, calibrated to erode human centrality. This historical grounding sets the stage for deeper influences, mythic, philosophical, and symbolic, that shaped how these cities were imagined in the first place. Lovecraft's lost cities did not emerge in a vacuum. They belong to a long lineage of doomed civilizations, empires drowned, overreached, or buried by time. Ancient texts across cultures preserve fragments of these myths: Plato's Atlantis, the biblical Babel, the Hindu tales of Lanka and Dwarka. These stories do not simply record the past, they encode a fear of it. Each involves a city that crossed the line, against nature, against the gods, against some primordial order, and was erased in response. Lovecraft inherited this pattern, but inverted its moral logic. His cities are not punished for arrogance. They are punished, if at all, for existing. Where classical myth punished excess through divine intervention, Lovecraft's cosmology discards gods with moral authority. Instead, his cities fall to forces too vast or indifferent to care about human concepts like justice. In the doom that came to Sarnath, the destruction of the city feels inevitable, not because it violated a known rule, but because its very act of rising displaced something more ancient. The philosophical implication is stark. In Lovecraft's world, civilization does not ascend, it intrudes. And what it intrudes upon is older, stranger, and often unrecoverable. Romanticism and the Gothic tradition also shaped these ruins. Beginning in the late 18th century, European artists and writers turned ruins into aesthetic objects. Piranesi's prison etchings, Byron's crumbling castles, and the melancholy of ruined abbeys infused decay with beauty. Yet Lovecraft's ruins resist sentimentalization. Their very geometry repels human emotion. Where romantic ruins mourn the passage of time, Lovecraft's cities seem to reject time altogether. This is not nostalgia. It is metaphysical dislocation. One must consider the influence of 19th century decadence literature as well. Writers like Joris Karl Huysmans and Théophile Gautier explored artificiality, corruption, and the exhaustion of culture. Their cities, often real but stylized, reek of opulence turned to rot. Lovecraft's cities share this sensibility, not an ornament, but an implication. They evoke a world long past its expiration, not yet dead, but no longer alive. Cadath, Irem, and Rlyeh do not crumble. They persist without reason. This makes them not monuments, but malignancies. Philosophically, Lovecraft engages most directly with cosmic pessimism, a tradition stretching from Arthur Schopenhauer to Friedrich Nietzsche to the early 20th century existentialists. Schopenhauer posited a blind, indifferent will driving all existence. Lovecraft's cities echo this mood. They are not legible as products of purposeful design. They feel arbitrary, alien, and unanswerable. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the idea that all events repeat endlessly, haunts cities like Rlyeh, which rises and falls in vast, incomprehensible cycles. Such ideas strip history of teleology. There is no progress, only repetition, forgetting, and collapse. Religious esoterica also offers important antecedents. The Gnostic tradition speaks of a world created by a false god, a flawed copy of a higher, unknowable reality. In such systems, architecture can function as a trap, a construct that limits perception rather than expanding it. Lovecraft's cities often do the same. They are mazes in both form and function, designed not to house, but to contain. This echoes ancient maps of mystical geographies, where lost cities, like Shambhala or Agartha, symbolize spiritual error or dangerous transcendence. But in Lovecraft's hands, these cities are not gateways to higher knowledge. They are ossified errors, sustained only by the momentum of forgotten logics. Compare this to the Dreamlands, Lovecraft's semi-autonomous mythos realm where many of his cities appear. Unlike the waking world, the Dreamlands are shaped by consciousness, yet refuse coherence. Cities like Celiphias or Thalarion offer the illusion of meaning, yet always conceal something unresolvable. This duality between the symbolic and the unknowable makes his cities literary paradoxes. They are both vessels of memory and agents of forgetting. To find them is not to know them, but to lose yourself within them. In these traditions, mythological, aesthetic, philosophical, esoteric, we see the conceptual scaffolding of Lovecraft's ruins. He did not invent the lost city as a trope. He transfigured it into a philosophical device. His cities do not warn us of moral failure, aesthetic decline, or colonial guilt. They remind us of something more disturbing, that the human story may not be central or even visible in the true shape of history. In the next section, we turn from the ancient lineage of ideas to the names and symbols Lovecraft chose to encode this dread. The cities speak, but not in any language we were meant to understand. Language fails early in Lovecraft's cities. Their names are the first signal, phonetic anomalies that resist assimilation into familiar linguistic systems. Rlyeh, Kadath, Irem, Yan-Ho. These are not words so much as distortions. They hover just at the edge of pronounceability, as if mutilated by time, or filtered through a throat that never spoke human speech. This is no accident. Lovecraft understood that naming is the first step in knowing. By obstructing that step, he severs access before it begins. The etymology of these cities is intentionally obscured. Compare Rlyeh to Arabic or Polynesian phonemes, glottal stops, doubled consonants, vowel clusters. It evokes ancient Semitic roots while remaining unplaceable. Kadath echoes Indo-Iranian sounds, reminiscent of Persian or Sanskrit, but offers no semantic content. These are linguistic ghosts, reference without origin. Lovecraft is not inventing languages in the Tolkienian sense. He is unmaking language. Each name implies meaning and denies it simultaneously. This generates a specific kind of horror, the terror of incomplete recognition. More than arbitrary syllables, these names function symbolically. Rlyeh, submerged and sunken, visually suggests drowning or suffocation through its orthography. Irem, drawn from real Arabian myth, blurs fiction and reality, inviting the reader to suspect forgotten truths beneath invented forms. Sarnath and Ib appear side by side, the former sleek and imperial, the latter lumpy and alien. Even the shape of the names encodes judgment. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft uses phonetic aesthetics as moral implication. Some cities sound human, others do not, and that sonic dissonance becomes a form of narrative contamination. Architecture functions in similar ways. Lovecraft's cities are described in terms that reject classical harmony. They are cyclopean, non-Euclidean, or simply wrong. These terms are not metaphors. They indicate a structural disobedience to perceptual logic, a stairway that descends yet rises, a window that cannot be seen from the inside. Geometry, here, is not design, it is ideology. Western architecture, built on symmetry and hierarchy, implies mastery over space. Lovecraft's alien geometries imply submission to something else. To enter such a space is not to explore, but to concede. The inscriptions within these cities deepen this linguistic rupture. Texts carved into walls or etched into obsidian are often described as undecipherable or only partially translated, yet dangerously so. Tekantin, the nameless. City, the murals are readable only through intuition, bypassing language entirely. At the Mountains of Madness, the bas-reliefs provide vast historical records, but comprehension comes at the cost of psychological integrity. This reveals something profound. Lovecraft's cities resist being read because reading is the first act of ownership. In his world, knowledge is not cumulative. It is corrosive. This treatment of symbols draws heavily from esoteric traditions. Alchemical texts, Gnostic gospels, and occult grimoires often hide meaning in layered metaphor, obscure scripts, and ambiguous diagrams. But Lovecraft reverses the intent. Esoteric writing seeks hidden truth. His cities encode truths that should remain hidden. The symbolic language is not an invitation. It is a filter. Only those willing to risk unmaking their worldview can proceed. And even then, what awaits is not revelation, but cognitive failure. By severing symbolic language from meaning, Lovecraft aligns with a modernist impulse, the collapse of confidence in linguistic transparency. In the wake of World War I, with propaganda and mass communication distorting truth, many writers questioned whether words could still connect minds across experience. Lovecraft extends this doubt into architecture, into place names, into maps. His cities speak, but in a tongue that dissolves upon contact. In the next section, we will examine how Lovecraft constructs authenticity through false scholarship and mythic layering, ensuring that even these illegible cities feel real enough to haunt. Lovecraft's cities do not ask to be believed, they ask to be researched. This distinction is crucial. Unlike traditional fantasy realms, which announce their invention through overt world-building, Lovecraft's cities enter the text obliquely. They are stumbled upon, hinted at, misremembered, or buried in secondary sources. He constructs myth not by making stories feel complete, but by making them feel incomplete in the right way. The illusion of truth arises not from what is told, but from what is withheld. Consider the nameless city. The narrative offers no origin, no map, and no surviving name for the place. Its very anonymity amplifies credibility. We trust ruins more when no one claims them. The city is presented not through a traditional narrative arc, but through archaeological notes, journal entries, and suggestive mural fragments. Lovecraft mimics the language of the field report, embedding just enough observational detail stone composition, ambient temperature, stratigraphic layers, to evoke scholarly legitimacy. Yet the content resists confirmation. This is his signature technique: precise form, unstable content. This pseudo-scholarly structure reaches its apex in At the Mountains of Madness. The novella is framed as a suppressed report from the Miskatonic University expedition, an institution Lovecraft invented, yet grounded with academic jargon, bibliographic, references, and technical vocabulary. The city discovered under the Antarctic ice is described with the tone of a cautious scientist, not a wide-eyed explorer. Stratigraphy, biology, and philology are all invoked. What emerges is a self-corroborating fiction. The more empirical the tone, the more likely the reader is to doubt their own skepticism. We must pause here to consider the function of the Necronomicon. Though not a city, this invented book operates as a central device in Lovecraft's myth-building. It serves as a unifying artifact, cited across multiple stories as the source of forbidden knowledge. But it is also a credential. When a character refers to the Necronomicon, they become linked to a wider network of texts, events, and locations. Cities like Rlyeh or Kadath gain mythic density not because they are described in detail, but because they are cited, as if their existence were a matter of record. The technique is bibliographic parasitism. Lovecraft's cities gain credibility by appearing in the margins of other invented documents. This recursive method mirrors the logic of real myth. Ancient cities like Troy, Babylon, or Irem were once considered fictions or legends. Their legitimacy fluctuated with each archaeological claim, each textual rediscovery. Lovecraft embeds this uncertainty into his storytelling. Cities in his mythos rarely appear in isolation. They are cross-referenced, distorted, or half-remembered in different stories. Ulthar appears in dreams. Irem is glimpsed in the desert. Leng may be in Central Asia, or not. This technique creates a kind of narrative palimpsest. The reader feels less like they are reading a story, and more like they are uncovering a corpus of forgotten knowledge. Another layer of authenticity comes from Lovecraft's integration of real geography. Irem, for example, is not his invention. Known as Iram of the Pillars, it appears in the Quran and in Arab folklore as a vanished city destroyed by divine wrath. By incorporating it into his mythos, alongside invented cities like Rlyeh, Lovecraft forces the reader into a state of epistemic confusion. What else might be real? This is not world-building as fantasy. It is world-blurring. The boundary between documented myth and invented horror becomes deliberately unstable. The cumulative result is a set of cities that feel researched into existence. Lovecraft builds narrative authenticity not by showing his world, but by implying it has already been studied, badly. The documents are incomplete, the explorers are unreliable, the data is corrupted, and that is precisely the point. His cities are not destinations, they are narrative sinkholes, places where meaning collapses under its own weight. This recursive myth-making prepares us for the deeper analysis to come. Having explored the historical, cultural, symbolic, and narrative scaffolding of Lovecraft's cities, we must now descend into their philosophical core. What do these cities mean, not as locations, but as structures of thought? In Part 2, we enter the inner geometry of Lovecraft's ruins, the ideas they encode, the entities that built them, and the minds they dismantle. Lovecraft's lost cities are not only settings, they are philosophical machines. Their foundations rest on three interwoven concepts: cosmic insignificance, entropy, and decay, and ontological instability. These ideas do not merely frame the ruins, they emerge from them. The deeper one examines the architecture, the clearer it becomes that these cities are not passive relics, but arguments in stone against human meaning. The first concept, insignificance, permeates Lovecraft's mythos. His cities are not ancient human capitals, but remnants of pre-human, often non-terrestrial civilizations. And at the Mountains of Madness, the vast Antarctic city of the Elder Things predates all known life on Earth. Human history is a footnote scratched into the margin of this deeper narrative. As the narrator puts it, the oldest legends of Earth have no meaning beside the tales carved on these walls. The horror is not that the city is older, but that it renders our presence irrelevant. Its scale, complexity, and endurance make human civilization look like an afterthought, brief, accidental, and unremarkable. Lovecraft deepens this with entropy. His cities are always in decline, or more precisely, they are always after decline. The moment of their fall is never narrated. We encounter them already broken, submerged, buried, or decayed. Even the dream city of Sarnath is introduced not in its splendor, but in the tale of its doom. This structural positioning mirrors the thermodynamic concept of heat death, the irreversible unraveling of order. The city does not fall because of a flaw. It falls because time wins. Lovecraft universalizes ruin, not as punishment, but as destiny. Yet entropy in Lovecraft is not just physical, it is cognitive. His cities exhibit what might be called ontological instability, a third, deeper philosophical function. These are not ruins in space, but fractures in reality itself. Rlyeh does not simply sink beneath the sea. It folds. Its angles defy geometry. As Johansen famously mutters, it was not dead, but dreaming. In Lovecraft's cosmology, the city is alive in some non-biological sense, suspended between existence and non-existence. Time does not pass normally there. Logic frays. The implication is metaphysical. Reality is not stable. The ruins reveal that the universe itself may be stitched together only loosely, and those seams are tearing. This third concept, dream reality collapse, finds its clearest articulation in the dreamlands. Cities like Kadath or Cthulhu exist within dream, yet possess internal coherence, histories, politics. But their consistency is deceptive. The further one journeys, the less clear it becomes whether the dream shapes the city or the city shapes the dreamer. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter realizes that his desires have led him in a circle, that he is both architect and prisoner of the city he seeks. The city is not real in the physical sense, but neither is it unreal. It exists in a third category, persistent unreality. This state destabilizes the very notion of perception. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft's cities suggest that space and time are provisional constructs. They persist only so long as something older allows them to. Rlyeh rises and falls not because of tides, but according to alien cycles beyond human comprehension. Lang may exist in multiple locations simultaneously, or in none. These narrative choices encode a vision of reality where the laws we trust are temporary and local. The city, then, becomes a breach, through which we glimpse the conditional nature of everything we assume to be true. The cumulative effect of these philosophical forces is disorientation. Lovecraft does not argue for any singular truth. He dismantles the machinery that allows truth to function. The city becomes the stage upon which human meaning fails. To walk through its corridors is to experience a kind of epistemic vertigo. Time slips. Language fails. Geometry rebels. In this sense, the lost city is not a place to be discovered. It is a theorem to be experienced and ultimately disproven. In the following section, we turn to the architects of these philosophical spaces, the entities and forces whose presence haunts the ruins even in their absence. The cities are built from stone, but they echo with non-human wills. Understanding who or what built them may reveal why they persist and why they are never truly abandoned. Lovecraft's lost cities are never neutral ground. They are residues of intention, designed, inhabited, or altered by entities whose relationship to space, time, and matter diverges sharply from the human. To analyze these cities without addressing their builders is to miss their philosophical function. The entities involved are not merely monsters lurking in ruins. They are civilizational forces whose presence reframes architecture as an extension of alien cognition. Foremost among these builders are the Elder Things, revealed most fully in At the Mountains of Madness. These entities are neither gods nor beasts, but biological intelligences whose civilization predates humanity by hundreds of millions of years. Their Antarctic city is not monumental in the human sense. It is functional, sprawling, and adaptive, more akin to a fossilized organism than a planned metropolis. The bas-reliefs depict art, science, and history as inseparable processes. This suggests a civilization without symbolic separation between knowledge domains. The horror arises when we realize that human specialization, art here, science there, may be a symptom of limitation rather than advancement. Equally important are the great race of Yith, whose cities extend across time rather than geography. In the shadow out of time, their architecture is vast but secondary to their true achievement. Temporal migration of consciousness. Their cities serve as storage facilities for minds rather than bodies. Libraries replace temples. Cylinders replace monuments. This reveals a crucial shift. The city is no longer a place to live, but a device to preserve thought against extinction. Not survival of the species, but survival of knowledge. The implication is unsettling. If such entities exist, then cities may be designed not for inhabitants, but for successors who are not yet born. Then there are the cities associated with great old ones, particularly Rlyeh. Unlike Elder Thing cities, Rlyeh is not fully constructed, it is imposed. Its architecture is described as non-Euclidean, but this is shorthand for something more radical. The city violates human spatial intuition because it was not built for perception. Cthulhu does not inhabit Rlyeh as a citizen. He is contained there, as if the city itself were a lock. This reverses the human relationship between city and inhabitant. The city does not serve the being. The being warps the city by existing within it. Nyarlathotep complicates this further. He is not a builder in the traditional sense, but a mediator. In stories like The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, he moves freely through cities that destroy others. He understands their logic. He speaks for forces that cannot be localized. If elder things build and great old ones distort, Nyarlathotep translates. His presence suggests that cities may function as communication nodes between realities. Architecture becomes language. Streets become syntax. The city speaks, but only to those who can survive the message. We must pause here to address absence. Many Lovecraftian cities appear abandoned, yet are never empty. Shoggoths still move in the depths. Deep ones linger beneath coastal ruins. Even when no entity is visible, the city retains agency. This implies that cities are not passive remains. They are systems left running. Maintenance has ceased, but function persists. Doors still open, paths still lead somewhere. The unsettling question emerges: for whom? These entities share one defining trait: indifference. They do not hate humanity. They do not oppose it. They simply outscale it. Their cities are not monuments to power, but byproducts of existence at a higher order of complexity. Compare this to human ruins, which mark failure or nostalgia. Lovecraft's cities mark supersession. Humanity was never meant to inherit them. At best, we trespass. At worst, we activate processes we cannot stop. The cities endure because their builders endure differently. Some sleep, some migrate through time, some dissolve into abstraction, but the cities remain as anchors, points where alien logic still touches the world. In the next section, we will examine what happens when humans enter these spaces, not explorers as heroes, but as stress tests. The ruins do not attack them, they expose them. In Lovecraft's fiction, humans do not explore lost cities, they are processed by them. The encounter is rarely physical danger, it is conceptual annihilation. Lovecraft's protagonists are not heroes in search of knowledge. They are flawed instruments, exposed to structures that reconfigure the boundaries of perception. Madness is not a narrative consequence. It is the intended result. Consider William Dyer in At the Mountains of Madness. A geologist by training, Dyer approaches the ancient Antarctic city as an empirical subject. He documents murals, stratigraphy, and architectural anomalies with scientific detachment. But the city does not remain passive. As he descends into its deeper levels, interpretive control begins to erode. The murals do not clarify, they overwrite. By the time he encounters the Shoggoths, language has collapsed into fearful compression. His final report reads as both confession and containment attempt. This is Lovecraft's pattern. The city unravels the mind not by violating logic, but by expanding it beyond endurance. This pattern recurs in The Nameless City, where the narrator's descent echoes a ritual more than an investigation. Each corridor leads deeper into pre-human architecture. Each step strips away anthropocentric scale. The narrator's climactic vision, an impossible parade of reptilian entities moving through vast halls, forces him to confront a world in which humanity is not only late, but irrelevant. The result is not revelation. It is psychological exile. He escapes the city, but no longer trusts the continuity of his own mind. Madness in these stories functions structurally. It is not the loss of reason, but the collapse of epistemic containment. Lovecraft stages his cities as cognitive traps, zones where the categories that organize perception, time, space, self, scale, become unstable. The protagonist does not go insane in the sense of hallucination or delusion. Instead, they confront a reality that continues to make sense, but in a way incompatible with human consciousness. This is why the narrators often survive physically, but report their findings with urgent dissuasion. As in The Call of Cthulhu, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. This function is not confined to the textual characters. It implicates the reader. Lovecraft's deliberate use of obscure references, untranslated names, and contradictory accounts places the audience in the same position as the narrator, uncertain, compelled, and destabilized. The experience of reading about these cities mimics the experience of entering them. Information accumulates, but understanding recedes. We know more, but comprehend less. Some cities do not even require direct contact to produce collapse. In the shadow. Out of time, Nathaniel Peasley's consciousness is displaced by the great race of Yith, allowing him to remember alien architecture he never physically touched. His dreams of vast libraries and non-human classrooms leave him fragmented even after returning to his body. Here, Lovecraft introduces spatial contamination at a distance. The city functions not as a place, but as a frequency, a structure that can be downloaded into the mind, corrupting it from within. We must pause here to note an unsettling implication. Madness is often treated in literature as a personal failing, a breakdown under pressure. In Lovecraft, it becomes a measure of accuracy. The more clearly one sees the city, the more one understands, the less one can remain sane. This reverses traditional epistemology. Sanity is not clarity, it is insulation. The mind, like a camera, can only capture so much light before it burns the image. Lovecraft's cities are overexposures, revelations that do not enlighten, but erase. Thus, interaction with these cities becomes a test, not of strength, but of containment. The survivor is not the hero, but the one who forgets best. In the next section, we will follow this trajectory deeper, into the architecture of forbidden knowledge itself, where maps become weapons, symbols breed infection, and the city's true function as an instrument of epistemic collapse is fully realized. In Lovecraft's cities, knowledge does not illuminate, it deforms. What begins as discovery becomes distortion, not because the knowledge is false, but because it is incompatible. Forbidden knowledge, in this context, is not prohibited by external authority. It is structurally corrosive, destined to dissolve the frameworks by which the mind organizes reality. The city is not a container of truths. It is a delivery system for cognitive collapse. The mechanism is architectural, and at the Mountains of Madness, the bas-reliefs are not inert records. They are active agents. As Dyer and Danforth decipher the sequence of images, they come to understand the vast history of the elder things. But the murals do more than inform. They reframe. The knowledge they gain is not additive. It replaces their previous understanding of Earth, evolution, and humanity. When Danforth sees something at the end of the city, something never described, he does not scream because of a monster. He screams because the last piece made the puzzle cohere. Comprehension completes the trap. Language is equally dangerous. In the Dunwich Horror, the Necronomicon contains references to lost places, including Leng and Kadath. These are not merely literary devices. They function like mimetic viruses. To read of the city is to become susceptible to its influence. This is not metaphor. It is metaphysical infection by reference. The symbol is the vector. The more clearly the city is mapped, named, or described, the closer it draws. Lovecraft's cities, in this way, behave like quantum anomalies. Observation changes their state and damages the observer. We must pause here to examine the role of maps. Cartography in Lovecraft's work is never stable. Rlyeh rises from the Pacific, not according to tides, but according to alignment. Leng exists in both dream and waking worlds, across multiple contradictory locations. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter attempts to chart the dreamlands, but the terrain shifts in response to his intentions. This reveals something deeper. Knowledge of these places is not a neutral act. It reshapes the terrain. To locate the city is to summon it. This idea that the attempt to know is itself the trigger appears again in The Call of Cthulhu. Johansson's crew lands on Rlyeh after following a vague radio telegraph signal. Their arrival activates a sequence of events culminating in Cthulhu's partial awakening. The city does not repel them. It waits. Their knowledge is the key, and once turned, it cannot be unturned. The The sea swallows Rlyeh again, but the damage is done. One man survives, but not unchanged. Lovecraft often alludes to symbols that predate meaning. In The Haunter of the Dark, the church ruins contain a window of strange glass that distorts perception. The city in miniature, it reveals what should remain veiled. Here, architecture is not shelter, it is interface. The city is constructed not to be lived in, but to communicate with forces outside normal space. This repositions the human not as the subject of knowledge, but as a conduit, briefly illuminated, then discarded. This brings us to epistemic collapse, the ultimate function of Lovecraft's city. It is not a site of danger, but of unmaking. The protagonist may leave the ruins, but the ruin does not leave them. Their conceptual scaffolding has been corrupted. Categories blur. Time becomes porous. Identity fractures. In Lovecraft's cosmology, the mind is not a tool for discovery. It is a fragile membrane stretched thin across chaos. The city does not puncture it. It reveals that the membrane was always torn. In closing this section, we must acknowledge that Lovecraft offers no redemption through knowledge. His cities do not promise enlightenment, only exposure. To see too clearly is to cease to function as a coherent self. In Part 3, we shift from theory to text, examining the earliest manifestations of these cities in Lovecraft's stories, their evolving symbolic roles, and the collaborative expansions that followed. The ruins deepen with each retelling. The trap becomes harder to recognize. The motif of the lost city appears early and forcefully in Lovecraft's fiction, crystallizing first in The Nameless City, 1921. It is significant that this story predates even The Call of Cthulhu. Though Lovecraft had flirted with the themes of cosmic antiquity and buried knowledge prior, this marks the first time he constructs a city explicitly alien in origin, hidden from historical record, and encoded with knowledge too vast for human sanity. The city, never named, never mapped, is described as lying in the Arabian desert, and the narrator finds it through obscure references in the Necronomicon. This marks the beginning of a key pattern. Cities discovered not through geography, but through textual archaeology. They are summoned by reading before they are found in space. What makes the city in The Nameless City significant is not its physical description. Though Lovecraft lingers on its low, impossibly narrow doorways, but the inversion of historical scale. The narrator realizes that the architecture was not built for humans, but by a pre-human reptilian species. When he observes the wall reliefs depicting these beings, he says, "It was a nightmare, yet some nightmare I had known before." Recognition without origin, an emotional memory of something evolutionarily impossible, introduces the concept of ancestral dissonance, a recurring effect of Lovecraftian ruins. The city becomes a mirror not for identity, but for its erasure. This inversion deepens in The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, where Rlyeh, the most famous of Lovecraft's cities, surfaces briefly in the South Pacific. What separates Rlyeh from earlier cities is its geometry. It is described by eyewitness Gustav Johansen as great cyclopean buildings, all dripping with green slime, with geometry all wrong. Angles behave incorrectly. Doors change proportions. Rlyeh introduces non-Euclidean architecture, not as abstract math, but as psychological warfare. The horror is not in what is seen, but in the mind's failure to orient itself. The city destabilizes the very act of observation. Rlyeh also introduces the rhythm of recurrence. It sinks and rises, not according to tectonics, but to cosmic timing. Cthulhu was not dead, but dreaming, and Rlyeh is its cradle, or its prison. The relationship between city and entity becomes reciprocal. When the stars align, the city reappears. This moment marks a shift. The city is no longer passive. It participates in mythic cycles, becoming a calendrical instrument. Its reemergence is not a natural event. It is a return, guided by an intelligence or force that supersedes physics. Other cities soon populate Lovecraft's growing mythos. Irem, referenced in The Call of Cthulhu and The Nameless City, is drawn from real Arabian lore, referred to in the Quran as Iram dat al-Imad, Iram of the Pillars. Lovecraft's use of the name creates a deliberate overlap between actual myth and fictional geography. It also complicates the idea of fictionality. If Irem is real, then what else might be? This strategy, implanting invented cities into pre-existing mythological or religious frameworks, enhances their plausibility by destabilizing the boundary between myth and scholarship. Irem becomes a hinge between the real and the invented, between folkloric ruin and cosmic sight. The dreamland stories offer a different urban topology. Cities like Ulthar, Delathlin, and Celephaeus appear in Dream, yet function with eerie consistency. The dream quest of unknown Kadath, 1926-27, weaves them into a coherent network, each city hinting at something stranger further afield. These are not entirely alien. They possess markets, priests, kings, but they vibrate with unreality. Kadath, in particular, stands as the ultimate unknowable city, never fully seen, always approached. The cities of the Dreamlands establish a second pattern, places that recede as they are pursued. They do not destroy the mind through overload, but through absence. These early appearances construct Lovecraft's cities not as isolated inventions, but as interconnected thresholds. A reference to Rlyeh might appear in a story about Arkham. A scholar of Irem may stumble across records of Sarnath. This mythic layering creates the illusion of depth, of a larger, hidden archive. The cities gain gravity through recurrence. They echo through stories, documents, dreams. Each new mention thickens the network, until the reader begins to suspect that these cities were always there, waiting beneath the narrative surface. What emerges from these earliest manifestations is a literary architecture of recursion. Lovecraft's cities are never presented all at once. They are fragments, illusions, mirages. Yet each story reinforces the others. The more the cities are glimpsed, the less they resolve. In the next two sections, we will examine two major stories where this architecture reaches its fullest expression. First, in the icy depths of At the Mountains of Madness, and then in the moral allegory of the doom that came to Sarnath. Each reveals a different face of the city, not as place, but as philosophical device. At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, is the most sustained and meticulous depiction of a Lovecraftian city. It abandons mythic suggestion in favor of detailed, near-scientific exposition. Here, Lovecraft constructs not only a city, but an entire pre-human civilization, its biology, history, and decline, embedded into the ruins of an alien metropolis in Antarctica. The story marks a critical point in the evolution of the Lost City motif. It shifts the locus of horror from the unknown to the barely comprehended. The city is not glimpsed in fragments. It is explored systematically, and that methodical exposure becomes the very engine of existential collapse. The city is introduced gradually, framed as the destination of a scientific expedition by Miskatonic University. As Dyer and Danforth ascend into the mountains, they discover impossible formations. black basalt towers rising from glacial cliffs. The language initially remains cautious, curiously regular, disturbingly symmetrical. But once inside, the city's alien nature becomes undeniable. Hallways spiral without logic. Reliefs line the walls in sequences that read like both language and narrative. The Iwt, explorers are overwhelmed not by monsters, but by the totality of what they see. The scale of the carvings was almost too great for belief, suggesting a race of beings incredibly large and alien. The city communicates an intelligence too ancient and vast to dismiss. What makes the city so destabilizing is not its incomprehensibility, but its coherence. Through the bas reliefs, Dyer reconstructs the entire history of the Elder Things, the beings who built the city. He learns they arrived from space, created life on Earth, warred with the star spawn of Cthulhu, and retreated into decadence. This is not myth. It is presented as data. Lovecraft simulates historiography. The horror is in the clarity. Earth was never ours. The city is not ruins of a failed empire. It is proof of our contingency. Humanity appears only briefly in the final panels of a cosmic fresco that spans aeons. Yet the city is not dead. As the explorers descend into deeper chambers, they encounter evidence of Shoggoths, bioengineered servitors created by the Elder Things and now autonomous. These creatures are never fully seen, only heard. A curious, irregular clicking, as of a singularly unhealthy cat coughing. The deeper they go, the more language breaks down. Danforth glimpses something outside time, possibly Azathoth, possibly the ultimate void, and suffers a mental rupture. The city has completed its function. It has expanded perception beyond the frame the human mind can bear. Importantly, the city exerts its horror without direct violence. There are no chase scenes, no physical threats until the very end. The true violence is epistemic. The scientists arrive expecting ancient stone and emerge with knowledge that strips meaning from biology, religion, and civilization. As Dyer warns, the world needs to be kept in ignorance, not because knowledge is evil, but because it is too great. This moment exemplifies Lovecraft's inversion of Enlightenment values. The city is not a site of progress. It is a repository of truths that invalidate all human frameworks. This shift in tone, from awe to paralysis, is Lovecraft's architectural trick. The city is not designed for terror. Its proportions are functional, its design pragmatic. But that very functionality, extended across eons, becomes unreadable. It does not feel malevolent, it feels indifferent. The city stands not to threaten us, but to remind us that we are irrelevant. The longer we look, the less of ourselves we recognize. This is architectural horror by subtraction. At the Mountains of Madness ultimately transforms the lost city into a philosophical instrument. Its narrative functions as a warning, not against hubris or blasphemy, but against perceptual overreach. The city gives the narrator everything: a history, a context, a cosmology. But the gift is not survivable. In the next case study, we turn to a very different lost city, Sarnath, a tale of moral allegory and mythic punishment, where the city does not reveal the universe, but is itself unmade by what it chooses to forget. The Doom That Came to Sarnath, 1919, presents a lost city not as a site of discovery, but as a moral artifact. Unlike At the Mountains of Madness, which foregrounds epistemic collapse through scientific exploration, Sarnath is written in the register of myth, timeless, dreamlike, allegorical. The prose is ornamental and ceremonial. The city's rise and fall are presented not as historical events, but as a cosmic pattern, a cycle of arrogance and erasure. The horror here is not spatial or architectural, it is temporal. Sarnath is doomed from the beginning, not because it violated a law, but because it dared to believe it existed outside of consequence. The narrative unfolds in retrospective summary. 1,000 years before the present, in the land of Manar, the humans of Sarnath slaughtered the strange, lizard-like beings of Ib, an older, gentler race who built their city beside a lake. Their god, Bokrug, is said to dwell in the waters. The men of Sarnath, repulsed by the Ibite's inhuman form, razed their city, drowned their idols, and built a magnificent capital on its ruins. Their civilization flourished in wealth, art, and arrogance. But on the 1,000th anniversary of Ib's destruction, Sarnath vanishes without trace. All that remains is a column of mysterious green stone, identical to those once found in Ib. Sarnath functions as cautionary city, but Lovecraft's caution is not theological. There are no commandments, no sacred texts violated. Instead, the city's crime is aesthetic, a failure to coexist with the alien. The people of Sarnath are not punished for greed or conquest. They are punished for erasure. They attempt to overwrite a past that resists deletion. Bokrug, the so-called Great Water Lizard, is less a god than a principle, the persistence of the abject. The moral structure is clear, yet the mechanism remains mysterious. No army arrives, no visible hand intervenes. The doom comes through time, not by it. The city itself is richly described: domes, towers, bronze gates, and sculpted gardens. But its splendor feels weightless. There is no human drama, no character conflict. The city is beautiful, but hollow. Lovecraft withholds psychological interiority. Instead, he renders Sarnath as a monument to denial. The deeper horror is that the city's grandeur is built on obliteration, and that such obliteration always leaves a residue. The green idol of Bokrug, thought to have been destroyed, reappears at the story's end, uncorroded, untouched by time. Its presence suggests that memory is indelible. The ruin was never of Ib. It was always of Sarnath. Sarnath also marks an important narrative experiment for Lovecraft: the use of mythic distance to produce unease. The story's language evokes biblical cadence and ancient Mesopotamian chronicle. This technique displaces the reader from immediate comprehension. The horror is not intimate, it is ritualized. The city's fate is recounted, not witnessed. This removes agency from the human perspective. Events occur not because of character decisions, but because they must. The story feels excavated, already ossified before it is read. The city of Sarnath does not exist within Lovecraft's primary mythos, but it shares essential DNA. It presents a civilization destabilized by contact with the non-human, an encounter initially suppressed, then returned with cosmic vengeance. The cycle of repression and reemergence anticipates later stories like The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Dunwich Horror. More importantly, Sarnath introduces the idea that cities can be characters, entities with arcs, memories, and fates. The city sins, the city suffers, the city vanishes. The human becomes incidental. In contrast to the cold empiricism of mountains, Sarnath is symbolic and lyrical. Yet both stories converge on a single point. The city, once lost, does not truly disappear. It lingers, as ruin, as memory, as legend. It can be exhumed through map, dream, or madness, but it is never entirely gone. In the next section, we explore how Lovecraft's peers and successors extended this mythology, building new cities atop his foundations. expanding the cartography of dread into new regions of dream, earth, and mind. The cities Lovecraft created did not end with him. They persisted, reinterpreted, expanded, and at times distorted by those who inherited his mythos. Lovecraft encouraged this. He exchanged ideas, place names, and creatures with a circle of correspondents who treated his stories not as closed texts, but as open cosmologies. The result was a collaborative cartography, a growing network of cities, ruins, and mythic geographies that extended beyond his original vision. In this expansion, the Lost City became a shared literary device, used to explore decay, secrecy, and the inhuman from multiple philosophical angles. August. Rlyeh, Lovecraft's most influential successor, introduced a radically different cosmology. Where Lovecraft's cities were immoral and indifferent, Rlyeh imposed a dualistic theology, aligning cities, gods, and elements into categories of good and evil. Cities became battlegrounds between opposing cosmic forces. For instance, Rlyeh's expansion of the plateau of Leng, already mentioned in Lovecraft's works, frames it as a site of conflict rather than indifference. This moral overlay often weakened the original ambiguity. Instead of unknowable spaces, cities risked becoming narrative instruments for cosmic justice. Yet Rlyeh's systematization also made the mythos easier to navigate, and thus easier to extend. Clark Ashton Smith, a close contemporary of Lovecraft, offered a contrasting expansion. His cities, particularly in the Zothique and Hyperborea cycles, are lush, decadent, and saturated with doom. Cities like Comorium or Xylac are already collapsing, not from external forces, but from internal exhaustion. Smith's language is baroque and sensual, evoking death not as a terror, but as a perfume. His ruins are not warnings, but pleasures, the last decadent bloom before extinction. If Lovecraft's cities induce madness through incomprehensibility, Smith's cities seduce through terminal beauty. Both perspectives share a core. Civilization is temporary, and the ruins tell a deeper truth. Later writers continued this expansion in diverse ways. Brian Lumley's Titus Crow novels reimagine mythos cities as accessible through technology and willpower, shifting the tone toward adventure horror. Lumley's versions of Rlyeh and Elysia are not abstract horrors, but landscapes navigated by occult expertise. This approach diminishes the epistemic terror of Lovecraft's cities, but increases their narrative utility. The city becomes a site of confrontation rather than erasure, still dangerous, but not unknowable. These transformations reflect a broader shift in horror fiction from the cosmic unknowable to the heroic confrontable. More recent authors return to Lovecraft's original ambiguity. Caitlin R. Kiernan, for instance, often employs ruined cities in dreamlike, fragmentary ways. In stories like A Red Tree and Agents of Dreamland, cityscapes emerge from psychological terrain. The ruins are not always physical, they are metaphorical, collapsed inside the self. Similarly, Laird Barron integrates the aesthetics of the ruined city into landscapes of American noir. His stories hint at buried structures in the Pacific Northwest, hidden installations, forgotten towns, decaying houses, all echoing the same Lovecraftian impulse. The past as a spatial infection. The influence extends beyond literature. The Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, first published in 1981, encouraged players to explore ruins, decipher glyphs, and navigate cities like Rlyeh or Yian-Ho. This systematized exploration risks undermining Lovecraft's intended unknowability, yet it also keeps the cities alive. Through gameplay, these sites are not only remembered, but experienced. mapped again and again by players who are themselves subject to madness. Similarly, video games like Bloodborne and The Secret World borrow the logic of the Lovecraftian city. Impossible architectures, dream ruins, histories that collapse upon contact. This proliferation does not dilute the original concept. It multiplies its faces. Each retelling adds a layer to the city's myth. Even when distorted, the central structure remains. The city as an entity older than history, designed by non-human logic, and capable of transforming the mind that enters it. Whether viewed through Derleth's theology, Smith's decadence, or Kiernan's dream fugue, the city endures because it is not bound to a single interpretation. It remains, as always, partially seen and never fully known. In Part 4, we follow these cities beyond fiction, into culture, folklore, art, and psychology. What happens when imaginary ruins become real to those who believe in them? What are the consequences when myth bleeds into memory? The cities are not done with us yet. Lovecraft's cities were born in fiction, but they do not remain there. Over time, they have drifted into a cultural category usually reserved for folklore and conspiracy, where lost civilizations are not just imagined, but believed. This is not a case of readers misunderstanding fiction. It is something more subtle, the deliberate blurring of boundary between text and testimony. In forums, documentaries, and fringe publications, names like Irem, Rlyeh, and Leng appear alongside Atlantis and Lemuria, woven into a modern mythos of ruins that must exist, because they feel like they always have. The most persistent of these is Irem of the Pillars, a city Lovecraft borrowed from the Quran and embedded into the Nameless City. This reference, though brief, unlocked a strange cultural feedback loop. In 1992, a NASA satellite reportedly identified ancient formations beneath the sands of Oman, leading to headlines claiming the lost city of Ubar had been found. Some media outlets connected this site to Irem, linking archaeological reality with Lovecraftian fiction. Though the actual ruins were likely a collapsed desert fortress complex, the myth expanded. Online, Irem became both a cursed city and a suppressed discovery, surfacing in occult forums and paranormal YouTube channels. The fiction had become substrate. This is not an isolated case. Claims of unusual underwater structures off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, or unexplained geometric shapes in Antarctica are routinely reinterpreted through a Lovecraftian lens. Rlyeh, originally a city invented for a dreaming god, has become a placeholder for any unplaceable ruin. The key shift is symbolic. When ruins are discovered with no obvious historical explanation, they are often absorbed into a myth of the Forbidden City, one whose builders were not simply lost, but deliberately erased. The premise is simple and durable. What if Lovecraft was not imagining the past, but remembering it? These sightings function as modern re-enchantment rituals. In a secular world increasingly mapped, measured, and explained, Lovecraft's cities restore mystery, not by claiming truth, but by resisting disproof. Their coordinates shift. Their architecture defies recording. Their names appear in both fictional grimoires and real mythologies. This ambiguity makes them culturally resilient. They cannot be disproven because they were never confirmed. They are not false in the usual sense. They are anti-verifiable, designed to thrive in the cracks between disciplines, between archaeology and dream. Urban legend amplifies this resilience. In Reddit threads and TikTok rabbit holes, users speak of strange staircases in the woods, sunken shapes seen from planes, or military no-go zones, aligned with the locations of Lovecraftian ruins. These stories follow a common logic. The city exists, but someone doesn't want you to find it. This merges the aesthetics of cosmic horror with the political structure of conspiracy. The city becomes a forbidden object, not only by scale or age, but by suppression. The horror is no longer just ancient, it is ongoing. This phenomenon parallels the history of other mythic cities, such as El Dorado or Shambhala. But Lovecraftian cities reverse the traditional longing. These are not paradises. No one seeks to find them and stay. They are anti-utopias, desired not for salvation, but for confrontation. To glimpse Rlyeh is to confirm that the world is not what we were told. To enter Leng is to lose the illusion of coherence. They offer the final myth, that meaning itself is provisional, and that somewhere, proof of this has been buried. Why does this idea persist? Because the city, as a symbol, holds too much weight. It is our greatest collective construction, mapped, governed, layered with history. To imagine a city that predates us, that rejects our logic, that cannot be incorporated into known history, is to flirt with a cosmic outsider perspective. And to suspect that such a city might be real, or worse, remembered, satisfies a deeper cultural anxiety, that we are not at the center, not at the beginning, not even at the surface. In the next section, we examine how this symbolic power continues to evolve, not in hoaxes or rumors, but in deliberate artistic adaptation. From cinema to games to music, Lovecraft's cities are not just sited, they are inhabited. And in these recreations, the architecture speaks again. Lovecraft's cities were never fully seen in his fiction, but in modern media, they are built. Film, games, and music offer new ways to explore the Forbidden City, not as a distant idea, but as a navigable space. Yet with each translation, a question lingers. What happens to the unknowable when rendered visible? Does Rlyeh survive rendering? Does the geometry of Leng remain non-Euclidean when turned into polygons? These adaptations are not just reinterpretations, they are philosophical experiments in making the unspeakable speak. Film has long flirted with Lovecraftian space, often indirectly. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, is perhaps the closest we've come to a cinematic at the Mountains of Madness. The buried alien structure in Antarctica, icy corridors, shifting forms, a threat from deep time, mirrors the logic of Lovecraft's Antarctic ruin. The horror is not just what the thing is, but where it came from and how long it has waited. Guillermo del Toro's long gestating, never realized adaptation of Mountains would have been the first attempt to bring the city itself to screen. His insistence on preserving the bleak, anti-human tone reportedly contributed to the project's repeated shelving. The city resists adaptation, even when its doors are modeled. Video games have proven more successful. Titles like Bloodborne, 2015, and Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, 2005, allow players to explore corrupted cities at their own peril. Bloodborne in particular constructs a layered urban nightmare, Yharnam, rooted in decay, forbidden knowledge, and shifting realities. As the game progresses, the city reveals deeper strata, dream versions, ancient ruins, alien structures embedded in the earth. This recursive architecture mirrors Rlyeh's dream logic. The city is not one place, but many layers of collapse, all coexisting. The player's madness meter rises not from combat, but from perception. The more you see, the worse it gets. In tabletop role-playing, the Call of Cthulhu RPG has made the city a narrative device. Scenarios often center on expeditions into lost places, underwater cities, forgotten plateaus, ruined temples, where players confront structures designed to outscale human comprehension. Unlike standard RPG dungeons, these cities do not reward exploration. They punish it. Players leave changed, or not at all. The design principle is philosophical. Progress equals exposure, and exposure equals decline. This reframes success. The best outcome is not victory. It is containment. Music provides an unexpected dimension. Ambient and drone artists frequently invoke Lovecraftian cities, not with lyrics, but with texture. Bands like Necropolis, Nodin's Ictus, or composers like Brian Lavelle craft soundscapes meant to evoke depthless caverns, flooded ruins, and impossible vaults. These are cities rendered in sonic decay, looped echoes, distorted reverb, harmonic disintegration. The goal is not to describe the city, but to simulate its psychological effect. The listener is not told about Rlyeh. They are submerged in it. The effect, much like the fiction, is slow disorientation. Even mainstream music nods toward the mythos. Metal bands such as the Great Old Ones, Yog-Sothoth, and Nile use Lovecraftian city names and imagery as frameworks for existential lyrics. These references are not decorative. They function as conceptual architecture, sonic cities of dread. The ruins here are emotional geographies. They represent not historical loss, but inner collapse. To scream the name of Leng or Sarnath is to gesture toward a self unmade by time. Yet across these media, a tension persists. Lovecraft's cities were terrifying because they were incomplete, always partially glimpsed. Visual and interactive media must resolve those spaces, give them form. This risks deflating the horror. And yet, it also introduces new methods of ambiguity. Games can fragment level design. Music can layer indistinct echoes. Films can obscure more than they show. The city endures, not by resisting representation, but by surviving it. In the next section, we turn from creative adaptation to cultural adoption. The city has moved beyond story and symbol. It now circulates in academic theory, subcultures, and online communities, not as fiction, but as a model for understanding collapse, ruin, and forbidden systems of knowledge. Lovecraft's cities are no longer just read or seen. They are used. Lovecraft's lost cities have not only shaped fiction, they've been absorbed into the conceptual frameworks of subcultures, disciplines, and discourses that rarely intersect with horror. These cities, once metaphors for unknowable knowledge, now circulate as tools for thinking about collapse, architecture, secrecy, and alienation. In the process, Rlyeh and Leng become more than symbols. They become lenses, ways to interpret the world, even when the user does not fully believe in what they name. One such appropriation occurs in urban exploration, urbex, subcultures. Explorers of abandoned buildings often describe their journeys in Lovecraftian terms, descending into forgotten cities, navigating non-Euclidean tunnels, or entering places untouched by the Worldbuilding present. These phrases are not coincidental. Lovecraft's language offers a vocabulary for ruin. It frames derelict malls, sewer systems, and Cold War bunkers as not just forgotten, but actively alien. A Reddit post about a sunken stairwell in Detroit might casually reference Dilith Lean. These are not literary allusions. They are rituals of estrangement, naming the place in order to destabilize it. Academia has also adapted Lovecraftian space, particularly in architecture, philosophy, and media studies. Scholars like Anthony Vidler and Mark Fisher have written about the uncanny and the weird as disruptions of built environment. Vidler's The Architectural Uncanny reads urban spaces as haunted by unprocessed histories. Fisher's Weird Realism sees Lovecraftian horror as a model for understanding modern alienation. In these readings, the city becomes a psychic structure, a shell for suppressed systems. A non-Euclidean vault is not just mathematically impossible, it is a metaphor for the way ideology bends perception. Other thinkers invoke Lovecraft in theory fiction, a genre where academic analysis merges with speculative narrative. The Cyclopean by Reza Negarestani, a philosophical horror text framed as a found manuscript, centers on cities as sentient, oil-breathing entities. While not explicitly mythos-derived, the language echoes Lovecraft: ruins that think, tunnels that shift, geologies that conspire. Here, the city is no longer built by something alien. It is the alien. The Lovecraftian function, where architecture produces epistemic instability, is retooled for 21st century geopolitics. In esoteric circles, some practitioners treat Lovecraftian cities as more than metaphor. Chaos magicians, for example, occasionally incorporate names like Rlyeh or Kadath into ritual structures, not as literal places, but as ontological zones. In this context, the city is used as a ritual map, a symbol of moving outside consensus, reality. These uses draw from Kenneth Grant's Typhonian trilogies, which claim that Lovecraft unconsciously channeled real, occult truths. Whether taken seriously or playfully, the act of ritualizing these cities reveals their adaptability. The city remains forbidden, but now as a symbolic territory of altered states. Online, Lovecraftian cities appear in world-building forums, mytho-poetic blogs, and ARGs, alternate reality games. Users collaboratively invent fake historical documents referencing Sarnath or Irem. Wiki entries detail the rise and fall of non-existent empires. These acts are not lies. They are performances of belief. The city becomes a living myth, constantly rewritten. The important question becomes not did Rlyeh exist, but how would its existence change our maps, our history, our sense of time? The function of the city is not to be found, but to make finding problematic. We must pause here to observe what all these appropriations have in common. Whether academic, magical, or subcultural, they use Lovecraftian cities as models for unseen systems. The city is no longer just a location. It is a metaphor for everything too large, too complex, or too alien to fully grasp. A haunted financial system, a decaying infrastructure, a trauma site disguised as a home. The Lovecraftian city becomes the structure behind the structure. In the final section, we return to the personal and philosophical. Beyond media, myth, and theory, these cities persist for a reason that cannot be entirely explained. They feel like memories of something we were never meant to recall. They return in dreams, in language, in moments of dislocation. The question is no longer whether the city is real. The question is what it has already changed, simply by being thought. The cities Lovecraft imagined were not just architectural spaces. They were psychological structures, built not of stone, but of thresholds, between sanity and madness, self and other, past and prehistory. Their persistence in modern culture suggests something deeper than genre popularity. These cities survive because they model a kind of fear no other literary device fully captures. The fear that the mind itself is a ruin, built atop older foundations that were never meant to be uncovered. At their core, Lovecraft's cities imply that civilization is not continuity, but interruption. Rlyeh, Kadath, and Ib are not destroyed by human hands. They predate us, outscale us, and in some sense, wait for us. This reverses the comforting modernist narrative of progress. We are not at the apex of history, but suspended precariously between collapses, walking over buried truths we dare not excavate. The horror is not that we will be replaced, but that we were never central to begin with. Psychologically, these cities externalize the anxiety of inherited trauma. In dreams, a city you cannot escape often represents the mind's architecture. Repeating thoughts, forgotten memories, unresolved grief. Lovecraft cities function similarly. They emerge suddenly in stories, often from dreams or buried texts, and once named, they cannot be unnamed. The city becomes a fixed point of psychological recursion, something the mind returns to but never survives. As Randolph Carter says after glimpsing Kadath, there are memories that only come when it is too late to forget them. This aligns with the concept of the uncanny as defined by Freud, the return of the repressed in unfamiliar form. Lovecraftian cities are familiar in outline, walls, towers, streets, but warped, misaligned, wrong in proportion. This spatial uncanniness mirrors cognitive dissonance. The city is the self, but distorted. The horror is not just what is found there. It is the recognition that part of you already knew it. This internal collapse is more disturbing than external threat. The fear is not that the city is alien. The fear is that it is yours. Philosophically, Lovecraft's cities destabilize the human relationship to knowledge itself. The city is where records are kept, where laws are written, where truth is archived. But his cities archive something else, unusable knowledge, truths that unmake the frameworks meant to contain them. A ruin like Leng or Sarnath does not merely preserve history, it radiates it, infecting those who approach with a timeline that cannot be assimilated. The result is not enlightenment. It is exposure, prolonged, irreversible, and void of meaning. Why then do we return to these places? Why do they echo through film, game, theory, art, dream? Because Lovecraft's cities answer a question modernity cannot resolve. What if reality does not care whether it is understood? These ruins speak not to apocalypse, but to irrelevance. They do not mark an ending, but the ongoing absence of any central narrative. The city outlasts us not in triumph, but in silence, and yet they endure. Perhaps we are drawn to them, because they reflect the parts of ourselves we cannot quite explain. The compulsions, the ruptures, the dreams of staircases descending forever. Lovecraft's cities are not metaphors to be decoded. They are conditions to be endured. They remind us that there are places in the mind and in the world that were never meant to be inhabited, only witnessed, and even that, barely. We end here, but the cities do not. They remain beneath language, beneath memory, beneath history, still shifting, still watching, still waiting to be found again.